This video is about Dr. David Martin, Dr. Robert Malone, RFK Jr., Children's Health Defense, and Christine Anderson, who seems to be idolized quite a bit in Canada. So, first I want to talk about some of David Martin's background here, and I'll let you decide what you think of him. So, it says here that he has served as Chair of Economic Innovation for UN-affiliated Intergovernmental Renewable Energy Organization and has served as an advisor to numerous central banks, global economic forums, World Bank, and International Finance Corporation and national governments. Okay, pretty interesting background for a so-called freedom fighter. Spokesperson for global financial and intangible asset accountability and quality reform, Dr. Martin has worked closely with the U.S. Congress and numerous trade and financial regulatory agencies in the U.S., Europe, and Asia in advocating and deploying infrastructure to support growing reliance on contract and proprietary rights in business transactions. Under the leadership of Dr. Martin, MCAM, which is his company we'll be taking a further look at in the video, MCAM has supported the modernization of banking and tangible asset, tax, and accounting laws through its work with oversight agencies and policymakers. It says Dr. Martin has founded several for-profit and not-for-profit companies and organizations and served several boards, served as co-chair of the ADC, which is Australia Davos Connection, and Australia Davos Connection Forum's Leadership Retreat, and Critical Infrastructure and Cybersecurity Councils. He was founding director of Melbourne Centre of Applied Innovation, served as CEO of eSurface. He was the founding CEO of Mosaic Technologies, Inc., which is a company that developed and commercialized technologies in advanced computational linguistics, dynamic data compression, and encryption, electrical field transmission, medical diagnostics, and stealth. He was also a founding member of Japan's Institute for Interface Science and Technology, founded and served as the executive director of the Charlottesville Venture Group, and he served as a board member for various tech-related companies as well, including Humanitad UK. Humanitad is Sasha Stone's organization, and we can see this photos from about 5 years ago. It looks like David Martin and Sasha Stone are fairly close to one another. And as well, I just want to show you, this is Mosaic Business Technologies over here. Just want to show that they're a U.S. management consulting firm for high-tech and e-commerce industries. And they also have a pretty unique logo with a colorful M over there. And then, as well, MCAM, which is Dr. David Martin's company here. It says he founded it in 1998 and has served as its CEO and chairman since that time. MCAM has been an international intangible asset underwriter and analyst firm spanning work in innovation, finance, trade, and intangible asset finance. He's the developer of several innovation-based quantitative indices of public equities and is the founder of the Purple Bridge Funds, and he managed the Innovation Alpha ETFs, and he is the creator of the Public Equity Index, the CNBC IQ 100, which is powered by MCAM, which now is reported as a leading economic indicator for the U.S. and global innovation economy, published by the Conference Board, which we will be looking into the Conference Board a little bit further into this video. But first, just want to show you some interesting symbolism here. So here's a tattoo of Dr. Martin's here, and in particular, it is the Eye of Thoth. Right here, the Eye of Ra is the exact opposite, and we can see the comparison here. So the Eye of Thoth relates the moon with feminine and yin energy, so more empathetic and more intuitive, I guess. And it explores human nature, emotions, sexual energy, intuition, and magic, and is a symbol of healing, powers, and protection. I just thought that was interesting to share here. And then, as well, you see the MCAM logo looks awfully similar to that of a Masonic apron. So I just think that those things are worth pointing out. And as well, we can see some of the partners that MCAM has. It has Selective German Index Engineering and the Conference Board, which I had already mentioned just earlier. So, moving forward, this is the Conference Board. It is described as a non-partisan, non-profit entity which offer a rich portfolio of insights focused on the greater good. Our areas of expertise include economic indicators, sustainability, corporate philanthropy, social responsibility, education, diversity and inclusion, and sustainable capitalism through our centers of expertise. So, and as we can see by this very large diagram here, we see a certain make-believe illness in the center, building a more just and civil society, and sustainability is the overall goal here that we could see meets all areas of this chart, and all of the particular buzzwords have to do with sustainable development, as if his background working with big banks and that sort of a thing shouldn't be enough for you. So now going to talk a little bit more about the conference board. So it says here, this is the road to COP28, which was Copenhagen 28. It was a meeting having to do with United Nations climate change, basically. And in a nutshell, it says here, considering the current rate of emissions growth and the uneven attempts to curb it, it is more likely than not that global warming will exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius this century, with a best estimate that this will occur before 2040, according to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's AR6 Synthesis Report, Climate Change 2023, released in March in advance of Copenhagen 28 in Dubai from November 30th to December 12th, 2023. So, and as well here it mentions that there's businesses and governments are facing pressure due to the climate action that apparently needs to be taken, and businesses that develop strategies and models aligned with the goal of not exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius can stay ahead of regulation while potentially reducing costs and operational disruption in the long term. So yeah, this is all very much related to what they call the green agenda. And climate change, when I hear this term, even though in context they're generally speaking about the environment, climate can refer to anything, a social climate, behavioral climate, whatever. And so in a nutshell, the aspects that revolve around weather and climate change are also just something meant to stimulate fear. And there's all these ideas placed, such as reducing the quote-unquote carbon footprint, even though every piece of living matter that I could think of on Earth has to be a carbon-based life form. So some of the language they use is definitely very puzzling indeed, and I'm just going to continue reading here a little bit. So, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for leaders to develop countries to aim for what they call net zero emissions as close as possible to 2040 to boost chances of holding that global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Again, global warming, climate change, all of that is just simply fear porn in order to keep us on edge. And there's a lot of foreshadowing having to do with climate change being the next step of a narrative rather than a sort of scamdemic scenario, if you will. So this is the moment for G20 members to come together in a joint effort, pooling their resources and scientific capacities as well as their proven and affordable technologies through the public and private sectors to make carbon neutrality a reality by 2050. So there is United Nations Agenda 2030, and then there's also something called Vision 2050, which I've seen actually promoted on the Knights of Malta website. So most governments and businesses with net zero targets have set a deadline of 2050, so the move would be a significant acceleration of ambition, and it goes on to mention net zero electricity generation by 2035 for all developed countries and 2040 for the rest of the world. So with this net zero business, we're going to return to that whole net zero terminology in a bit, but first I want to say that I saw this video here that I think is worth watching for anybody that is unsure about David Martin, and it goes on to use Wayback Machine when looking at one of the particular organizations mentioned, which is the Intergovernmental Renewable Energy Organization, which was founded in 2008. And so, as pointed out in this particular video, I'm just going to kind of regurgitate a little bit of it, this was the domain that belonged to that website, but as we can see here, it's just some sort of home development website. It doesn't have anything to do with the Sustainable Development Agenda, to my knowledge. And then, when using Wayback Machine and going back to look at this organization in particular, we can actually see, going to the date of May 2nd, 2008, we see that there is, of course, devotion to what's called the Millennium Development Goals, which is just pre-sustainable development goals is just a pre-existing term prior to the updated sustainable development terminology. And so, moving forward, then looking at the website in a different year, in 2016, we can see as well that nothing has changed in terms of the devotions towards sustainable development. And of course, they make reference to the Paris UN Conference of Climate Change and in accordance with the proposed Sustainable Development Goals, etc., etc. And I know that the Paris Accord actually as well was signed by Pierre Poilievre in Canada, another just face of hopium, if you will, but that's what you get when you play politics, as red and blue pretty much are the colors of duality. So the narrative is always controlled on both sides in history. And Selective, so this is one of the partners of David Martin's company, MCAM. Sorry for the hesitation there. It says Selective is a German provider of finance indices based in Frankfurt, and the company develops, calculates, and markets cost-efficient indices over several asset classes, including equity, fixed income, and commodity indices. So Selective also engages in the development and branding of complex strategies, which are not based on traditional underlying such as stock and bonds, but instruments like funds, life insurance products, or a basket of currencies. So now what's interesting, I'm just going to take this a step further, is Net Zero Financial Service Providers Alliance. These are some of the partners of Selective, and this and it says commitments to sustainability. So obviously these particular organizations are on board with the Sustainable Development Agenda. And I find it interesting because the Net Zero Financial Service Provider, they have a partnership with a variety of organizations like Bloomberg, and the two that I have mentioned in previous videos are KPMG and my Marcus Ray videos, and then with Cafefe Bakery, I talked about PwC as well. So I'll leave links in the description for those two videos there if people are concerned about those particular organizations. Just other synonyms of the Sustainable Development Agenda, really. So this particular content creator, 7 Grains of Salt, is somebody who puts together certain pieces, and I find that I agree with about half of the content, as there is some very good points brought up in terms of how organizations connect with one another and that sort of a thing. However, in a religious sense, I don't agree with this particular content creator, and as well the interpretation of symbolism as well, I as well have a little bit of discrepancies with. But other than that, this channel is alright, pretty decent, and did a fairly good job calling out RFK Jr. in particular. And it mentions here in this video that he's running for president within the Democrat Party. And this is interesting, opposing Donald Trump as such, because again, this is just controlling the narrative on both sides once again, right? All you're doing is replacing the face of Joe Biden with somebody who's a little bit more widely respected, if you will, and has a little bit of a better reputation underneath his belt. However, fact of the matter is, RFK Jr. is pretty much seen alongside celebrities, the LGBTQ community, and he's the president of something called, or was the chairman of something called the Waterkeeper Alliance, which I'll be getting to. And as well, he attended Georgetown Preparatory School, which is a Jesuit college preparatory school in North Bethesda, Maryland, for boys in the 9th through 12th grade. And he also graduated from Harvard College, which is interesting. And the Waterkeeper Alliance here, once again, they're basically on board with the Sustainable Development Agenda, if you will. And I'm going to move forward, speaking about them a little further. So it says RFK Jr. announced yesterday, this article's from November 10th, 2020, that he was stepping down as president of Waterkeeper Alliance, a position he's held for more than 20 years, to devote himself full-time to other issues. So now Waterkeeper, it is honored and excited to become a UNEP partner. I'll explain what that is eventually, with the United Nations Environmental Protection Program, I think. Working alongside the world's most influential and prestigious environmental organizations to advance sound science, laws, policy, and practice, said Mark Yagi, Executive Director of the Waterkeeper Alliance. This designation recognizes the critical work of waterkeepers and allows us to deepen that impact through strategic partnerships, capacity building, funding, education, and other opportunities. We look forward to collaborating with UNEP and its partners and continuing to advance progress on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as related health, education, and security goals. Okay? So, and we can see some of the donors to this particular organization here are interesting, to say the least. We have Fidelity Investments, which I've mentioned in a few other videos as well, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, and different Morgan Stanley related groups. So, interesting to see. This organization, of course, is on board the Sustainable Development Agenda, so it's not really surprising when I see the organizations attached to it, but I must say I was definitely surprised by RFK Jr. for sure, as he has a very widely respected reputation, including his father and his uncle, Bobby Kennedy and John F. Kennedy. So, RFK Jr. is founder, chairman, and chief litigation counsel for Children's Health Defense and founder of Waterkeeper Alliance, as I have said. So now to talk a little bit about Children's Health Defense in particular. They're definitely twisted, to say the least. I mean, they're demanding a safe this thing, which I can't even say the words in this particular video. Why would they be demanding a safe drug or procedure for something that is not even proven to exist? This is the big question here of all. So it's like they're very much playing into the narrative by entertaining the existence of, we'll call it DVOC. And as well, here the idea of tailored Vs is hardly new. Gregory Poland, the head of Mayo Clinic's V research group, has been working to unite the fields of genomics and this, which is what he calls this, for 22 years. Again, I can't read those things without this video being taken down, but I don't know why somebody is doing genetic research for something that isn't proven to exist, and you're trying to develop a new piece of genetic technology for this thing, this is just playing right into Big Pharma's narrative. And anybody who watched my previous video, I spoke a little bit about Del Bigtree and how his organization gets funded by Big Pharma, which is definitely unusual for somebody who is, well, quite close to RFK Jr. and somebody who is supposedly tackling the narrative. So, in this particular video here on Greg Wyatt's website, and by the way, Greg Wyatt, good job at what you do, keep it up. It says here, in this particular video that has a picture of Hillary Clinton on the front of it with RFK Jr., it says that RFK attended Ghislaine Maxwell's residence on June 5th, 2014 after a panel discussion, and RFK Jr. also endorsed and campaigned for Vice President Al Gore during his 2000 presidential campaign, and endorsed John Kerry in the 2004 presidential campaign, and noted his strong environmental record. Yes, very good, John Kerry. Very strong environmental record. Very much stronger allegiance to the Skull and Bones Society, though, don't you think? Late 2007, RFK Jr. and his sisters Kerry and Kathleen endorsed Hillary Clinton in the 2008 Democratic Party presidential primaries, and as well RFK also campaigned for Obama. So RFK Jr. as well, he regularly associates with people like Louis Farrakhan, who I also spoke about Louis Farrakhan in my Marcus Ray video in particular. And Louis Farrakhan is somebody who is associated with what is called the Boule, which is a French word for servant of the king. And the Boule are basically African-based fraternities. And as well, Louis Farrakhan associates himself with Scientologists as well. He kind of combines Islam and Scientology in his sort of weird cult following, if you will. So, also Scientology in the US seems to play a very large role in controlling the narrative. As I had discussed last video, some of the people that are in George Soros's pockets are also some very big Scientologists in particular, and those are people who associate themselves with Del Bigtree and as well, I guess, RFK Jr. here. So now I'm going to move on to talking about Dr. Robert Malone in particular. And first, I just want to start off with this photo right here showing the lovely hidden hand. And we'll get to Triad Claw, or whatever they call it, in a moment. So, Robert Malone, excuse me, was asked in this video if he was controlled opposition, quite bold-faced. Now, I will just say that Robert Malone compares this kind of a thing to being asked if you're still beating your wife, is what Robert Malone says. And I have to say, if you're going to ask somebody if they're dishonest, they're not going to give you an honest answer straight up, which is pretty much what I feel Robert Malone is saying, but it doesn't change what he is, nonetheless, which I would call him controlled opposition for sure. He doesn't make any effort to put down any of the experimental products used on people in a coercive manner, if that makes sense. Sorry for the strange phrasing of words. He doesn't call to get rid of this technology for the public, especially in relation to something make-believe, DVOC, as I will call it for the duration of this video. And as well, he mentions he has had friends and such who have worked within the CIA and that kind of a thing, and he doesn't make an effort to put down these organizations whatsoever. He just specifically calls for a safer use of these particular things, and that to me is just beyond questionable. It's like you're allowing a narrative to continue more than anything. And then here as well, Robert Malone, some of the things that this particular gentleman here had to say about him are the same things that I'm saying. Is just simply put that Robert Malone doesn't put down the use of these particular drugs on the market, and he also will not discuss the fundamental academic questions at the core of the industries he's been associated with his whole life, as in the intelligence community, medical industry, and that kind of a thing. He just says these things need to be tested more because the rules of testing were broken. Okay, whatever. Alright, now moving forward. Here, this is a particular summit, which I can't say the name of here, but we see Christine Anderson in attendance, and this is, of course, at the European Parliament, as she is affiliated with the European Union. I'll get to talking about Christine Anderson a little bit more in future. Now, as well, Robert Malone was in attendance, as well as Byron Bridle here. And we can see with this Reignite Freedom website here, there was a particular event where we can see some of the names that are here include some famous Canadians and Americans, Robert Malone, Amanda Forbes, Dr. Peter McCullough. Oh, there's RFK Jr. and as well Christine Anderson is going to show up momentarily right here. Good timing. So now moving forward to talk a little bit about Christine Anderson. It's interesting that we have somebody from the European Union that is highly respected in Canada, because the thing is, the European Union just goes hand in hand with the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. Is just another organization doing that. So I don't know how people can't really read between the lines, especially it's like trusting politicians. Trusting the European Union is just another step up of ridiculousness to me. So looking at some of the organizations that sponsored Christine Anderson's visit here, we have Children's Health Defense Canada, and Jonker Trucking, and Can American Stone Spreader. Now, it's interesting to see Children's Health Defense here. This says Children's Health Defense Canada, and I know that they probably have different directors than that of the U.S. counterpart, which is, I think, the main headquarters. But I just thought that was an interesting correlation. And it says here, last year, Christine Anderson, a member of European Parliament for Germany, made headlines by publicly criticizing Trudeau as a dictator. While she was hailed in Canada as a freedom champion, it's worth asking if there's something more self-preserving in this condemnation. And yeah, it's funny because I guess all you need to do to earn Canadians' respect is to basically say that Trudeau is a dictator, and it's like all you're doing is really punching a punching bag. You're stating the obvious. So I don't see how that really earns any respect. That's like beating a dead horse at this point, you know? So, granted, this alternative for Deutschland politician is likely more eloquent than the typical huckster who's been making their way across Canada over the last 3 years. Still, one can't help but see this as an opportunistic way to cash in on anti-Trudeau sentiments. Yes, well said, Canuck. Well said indeed. And we see some of the prices here for the sponsorship are just ridiculous. And it says one of the major sponsors listed is Children's Health Defense Canada, and as covered before, they are a plaintiff in a lawsuit in Ontario that's been sitting idle for nearly 2 years. Interesting connection. So that's funny because one of the directors of Children's Health Defense Canada is Rocco Galati, who definitely has questionable works in the courtroom for sure. And these were some of the ticket prices available. Regular tickets were $250 and VIP tickets were $500. Like, all in all, this is just a simple cash grab that is, quite frankly, going nowhere. And I'll just show you a little bit of her resume here, or sorry, not her resume, a little bit of the committees and such that she is a part of within the European Union. So, Identity and Democracy Group member, Christine Anderson, Committee on Culture and Education, Women's Rights and Gender Equality, Inquiry into the Use of Pegasus and Equivalent Surveillance Spyware, Committee on Internal Market and Consumer Protection, Special Committee on this particular thing I can't say. So, Now I'm going to move forward and speak about her a little bit. Now the reason why I'm showing this particular thing they call triad claw, I don't think that's even the formal name for it. It's whenever you're basically touching your ring finger and middle finger together. This is one of the subtle signs used in the craft of Freemasonry. And we can see, if you look closely at her hand, we can see her doing that very same thing right there. And for women Freemasons, that is the Order of the Eastern Star. And the reason why I bring this up is because I had not noticed before when I had made a video about J.D. Anderson, who's the person of the far left there. We could see as well, with his hands, he is doing the exact same sign. So we have yet another Freemason, and I've already called out Jared Rainmaker Raw in my J.D. video. We see when Christine Anderson visited Canada, she met a lot of our so-called freedom fighters. That includes J.D. and several others, Colin Ross. And as well, this is when she went to visit different members of Parliament, and actually Pierre Trudeau, nice fluff piece in the paper. Sorry, not Pierre Trudeau. I meant to say Pierre Poilievre. He ended up basically condemning Christine Anderson for visiting Canada and spending time with some of our MPs. And now, the guy I know a little bit about here is Dean Allison. He's an interesting character because he was involved in some of the same meetings that Joanne Meny was involved with, and Joanne Meny had to do with advocating for the social economy, which is the fancy Quebec globalist way of saying Agenda 2030. And Maxime Bernier as well was involved because he submitted reviews to the same organizations in which Dean Allison and Joanne Meny were part of meetings for. So, and then the other two people I'm going to point at are Bethany Nodwell and Stacey Cowder, which I see seem to accompany Christine Anderson. And Bethany Nodwell as well as doing that triad claw, interestingly enough. And we see she's met Tamara Leach and this particular lawyer who I can't remember the name of offhand. I think he works for the JCCF. And another of the same photo, and so on and so forth. So, all in all, I'm just going to say here, use your discretion with these people and don't let their reputations fool you. Because what's going on, I don't even want to say closed doors, but right in plain sight, is pretty disturbing, especially when people are working to build a new drug of sorts that still revolves around genomics as a study for something that wasn't even proven to exist. So it's just pretty much rebranding the exact same narrative that the puppets are throwing at we the people. And it's no different than Donald Trump talking about freedom cities, which is the same thing as saying smart city, or as Christine Anderson would say, smart ghetto. So, all in all, I think I've said everything I want to say, so thanks for watching, and if anybody has any comments or questions, anything like that, feel free to comment in the description. Thank you for watching.